I'm Michael with SevenWinds Flutes, and step 2 of how to make a flute, I thought I'd show you the tools. There's many tools that you can use, and actually I had to dig out some of these because since I started boring flutes, I don't use them very often. I'm going to skip the table saw. Everybody knows you're going to have a table saw in order to cut your flute halves, and talk about the router table. On the router table, I had difficulty with the small table, so I expanded the table with two pieces of 3/4 inch plywood and glued those together and screwed them together. And then down here I've got 2 support bases to make sure it stays flat. And I put on a Craig fence, and there's a reason I'll show you here in just a minute why I put that on there. Router table's a router table. Don't know what. Okay, this is the primary reason I bought the Craig fence, which is a little bit pricey. When you release this lock and this lock back here, you can do a coarse placement. And you've got a digital, or not a digital scale, but you've got a ruler down here that allows you to get in the ballpark. Okay? And if you lock it down, it'll stay there. But here's the other sweet feature. I had difficulty getting the bores centered. I could get in the ballpark, but I couldn't do a fine centering of the bores in the wood, in the stock. So if you clamp this down with this clamp released, then there's a thumb wheel back here which enables you to dial it in quite literally, I would say in thousandths of an inch. In all probability it's more like 5 to 10 thousandths of an inch, but you can simply dial this back and forth and fine-tune the location of your blank, and then when you have it where you want it, lock that down, make sure that's locked down, then clamp this clamp here, and then I always set the clamp in the back to keep the edge of the fence from moving. Well, I wish I could take credit for this little invention, but I can't. Bill Hughes, in his DVD of how to make flutes with power tools, came up with this jig. The router, to me, is the most dangerous tool we've got in the shop, maybe next to the table saw. And I value my fingers for flute playing. This has 2 advantages. One, it keeps your fingers way away from the cutter blades. I've seen people, with their hands like this, milling it. That just scares me to death. Anyway, with this jig here, it's got these 4 knobs which allow you to adjust the depth, or I should say the thickness of your blank. Alright? And so right now if I put this blank in here, which is a little bit warped, it doesn't, this whole thing needs to come down a little bit, so we loosen these up and then shift it down, then tighten them up. Then it's just a matter of putting this clamp down, and these clamps are available at Harbor Freight. That's the place I found the best buy on them. I made it out of 2 2x6s, and as you can see up here, I've marked where the sack is and where the bore is. Once the work is clamped down, you bring it up here, start feeding it in. When you get to this tape right there, you lift it up, move it over, and then set it back down and continue the cut to the next tape. I went too far there. To the next tape. Then lift it up, and then I put the other half of the flute in and repeat that process. Then I turn the router off, increase the depth a little bit, and turn it on, go at it again, come across here to the tape, lift it, shift it, set it back down, cut to the tape, lift it, and I'm done. Shut the router off. This is the safest way I've ever seen to cut flute blanks, and it's well worth the time. The other thing, because of the large mass of like 2x6s, you've got something which really holds the work in place well. It keeps your hands clear. And you'll notice how I've rounded this edge off. That's because when you do this, I usually cut in hardwoods. I'll only cut like a 1/16 of an inch at a time. I never try and cut a 1-inch bore, cut a blank a 1/2 inch deep in one pass. That's insane. Anyway, because I make different size flutes, I made a similar jig for little bitty flutes using a half, those are primarily 1-inch blanks and boring like a 1/4 of an inch deep for a 1/2 inch bore. And the same jig, only this is for great big flutes with like 1.5 inch bore. Anyway, I wanted to show you that. Like I said, Bill Hughes came up with it, and on his DVD video, which I purchased from the Oregon Flute Store, How to Make Flutes with Power Tools, it talked about this jig. And I said, I like my fingers for playing the flute. I'm going to do it. It's worth the time and the investment to create it. The next tool I use frequently is a belt sander, and I selected the Ryobi Rigid. It's a Home Depot product for the reason you can use it as a belt sander, or you can simply remove this . Drop that in, and convert it to a spindle sander. I put the dust collection on it. I put this grate to keep from sucking birds and one thing or another up into my exhaust system. Anyway, this is a handy little tool, and next to that, a tool that I find indispensable is a small bandsaw. Small bandsaws are relatively inexpensive. This is a little Delta. I think you can get them for around 150, 200. and I've had this one for probably 10 years. And the reason, I've got a large bandsaw, but this is just so much easier to use. The blades are cheaper, easy to replace, and it's invaluable in terms of shaping birds. So I usually shape the bird on the little bandsaw, move it over to the belt sander, and smooth it out. Those are primary power tools, and next session we'll get into looking at hand tools. Okay, not a real fancy drill press. Actually, I need a new one. The most important thing on using the drill press, unlike most flute makers, I use the drill press to tune my flutes. Anyway, using a V block, make a V block. I enlarged, got a table that was larger than a drill press table so you can work with longer items. You can line that up, slide it back and forth, and stay in position on keeping your hole centered. Sometimes I will angle this up, put a block under here. If I want to undercut, I'll use the drill press and then the files. Recently I got these Hitachi drill bits. These are the finest drill bits. They were on at Lowe's. They had them on sale. Drill bits need to be in 64th inch increments, and they had these on clearance for like $12, and they were $40 I think new. And anyway, these Hitachi bits cut cleaner than anything that I've ever had before. Went ahead and bought 4 sets of them. So, not much else to say about the drill press. The V blocks, I'll take the flute down to the block, lay that up there where it's nice and level, tape it down, and then it stays in place. Well, let's go shopping. I really purchase a lot of my tools at grizzly.com, and since I started boring flutes, I don't have a lot of the equipment that I had when I was making them without a boring machine. This is a cross slide vise, and it's extremely helpful in making birds, making wings on birds, and without spending $1,000 you can put a cross slide vise on your drill press and then put some end mill cutters in it. So this is a cross slide vise that I used in the past. I gave it to a buddy of mine. You clamp your work down, and then you can dial it in an X direction or a Y direction. That would go this direction and this direction. It'd be under $100. Actually be probably about $100 with shipping, I don't know. It's pretty good size. One of the things I wanted to highlight is it weighs 22 pounds, and the base is 5 by 10 inches. The kicker is this overall height that goes a little over 5 inches above. So whatever plate you're on your drill press you're mounting it to, you have 5 1/4 inches plus the length of the end mill and the drill press. So you might want to take that in consideration for your particular drill press. One of the reasons I like grizzly.com so much is A, they're fast. They got real life fast customer service people, and they also sell parts. So when something isn't right, you can order parts to repair it. It's one of the reasons I bought Grizzly equipment. Anyway, so if you have an end mill, or excuse me, if you have a cross-sliding vise, and there's others available, if you go to YouTube, you can see some that are offered by Harbor Freight. This one's far superior to Harbor Freight's because you can adjust the gibs on the vise, make it move smooth. Anyway, once you have an end mill vise, you're going to need some kind of a cutter. And I found this is the most economical cutter. Alright, this is a set of 4 cutters. It has 3/16, quarter, 5/16, 3/8, 7/16, ½ inch, 9/16, 5/8, 11/16, and 3/4. You probably won't ever use the 2 largest ones. It's a 4 flute cutter. I like the 4 flute cutters because it gives a little finer cut than a 2 flute cutter. But you can cut on the side of this. You can cut on the side of the cutters. It comes in a nice box like that. Let me go back to these cutters here. So you can cut along the side of the cutter, and it's great for putting a slot for where the sack and the true sound hole is located. Now the only thing, this has a smallest cutter is a 3/16 cutter. So I'd also recommend getting an 1/8 inch cutter, and there's a number of them online. This is their 1/8 inch end mill. Alright, that will turn your drill press into somewhat of a makeshift end mill. The only problem you're going to have, particularly if you're milling the true sound holes, is to set the depth. And what I did on my drill press initially was I used brass shim stock, and then I adjusted the lockdown, and then I could put a shim in it, pull it down, and I could adjust the height, or excuse me, the depth of the cut. It was crude, not terribly precise, but it worked. For a while I tried using a router. To me that was too dangerous. The cross-slide vise with an end mill cutter on a drill press is a lot safer piece of equipment. Now you can also buy and this gets expensive quick, but G8689. This is a mini milling machine, and I purchased one of these, or a model very similar to it, years ago. The only difficulty is though it has a fine depth dialing, you can't really measure it. It doesn't have a depth indicator on it. So the one I purchased, which has all the bells and whistles essentially, this is the one that I purchased. I got one that was longer in the bed, so you can set your tuning holes in a nice straight line. It's got a digital depth finder over here, or depth gauge, so you can fine tune. You can cut down thousandths, 2,000ths, 10,000ths, whatever, for making your flue. This is an RPM speed indicator here. Anyway, Another thing that Grizzly has, they have economical router bits. And let's see if we can find some here real quick. Years ago, I was researching on the internet. I found these two DVDs by Bill Hughes, and if you want to get on a fast track, and this is not an advertisement, but there are so many different opinions and one thing or another on the internet that it became confusing. These are so well organized, professionally done, far better than anything that I've been able to show you so far. That gets into, there's two of them. This one with basic hand tools, and this one using power tools. They are excellent. I'm going to try and present these hand tools in some kind of first most important through less important. Anyway, to begin with, safety glasses and a respirator. I cannot stress enough how important a good respirator is. Those paper masks won't save you. Anyway, next item, measuring tools. When I was young, my dad told me if I was going to build anything, if I got within 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch, I was a good builder. And if I got within 1/16 of an inch, I was like a master craftsman. In the world of making flutes, we're talking thousandths of an inch. So I've got some different measuring tools here. A vernier calipers, you can't live without. Harbor Freight sells this one, I think, for like $10 or $15. Another thing you see in that Bill Hughes video, I bought several of these 4-inch squares. They are indispensable. Forget plastic rulers, get metal rulers. They have better defined dimensions on them. For measuring a depth gauge. This is great for, you can run a dowel rod down a flute, and I'll show you here. Take that flute, or that. I don't have a dowel rod handy. Put this over. First you zero it out. Zero it out, and then you can measure your depth, or this will work. We've got it zeroed out. You can see on this flute here, well, you know you can't because of the position of the camera. My cutting edge in this one is 12 thousandths deep. The flue depth is 27 thousandths deep. It's the only way I know to accurately get consistent results. And even using digital tools, there is error of measurement. Otherwise, you cannot. It is absolutely impossible to measure something precisely 10 times. Now, after 10 times, you could make an average and get a good number. This little gauge is kind of handy. It's great for determining the height of a router bit, height of a saw blade. It also has a little probe on here that'll double as a depth gauge. So now you can use it as a depth gauge. These are not expensive tools, but they're absolutely essential to have good measuring tools. Alright, let's see what's up next. Knives. Even though I'm not doing my flutes and halves, I'm still using knives. And the sharper the better. Sharpening is a subject for a whole different video. This is one of my favorites here. Razor saws, sometimes handy. X-Acto knives, I buy blades by the 100-pack. Next, a plane. You can buy a plane at the big box stores. The blades are not sharp, and if you want to spend the time getting the blade sharp, they won't hold an edge. They'll work for you. I bit the bullet on this one. This is Veritas, and early on I used the heck out of this Veritas plane. Files. These SteelX diamond files are very handy for doing a fine cut. But the one that I really like for hogging out material, these are made by Karate. They're an Italian file and bought individually at Woodcraft. They're rather pricey at about $18 or $20. I found Karate online, ordered them. All of these ran about $70. They've got flat, they got round, they got square, they got half round, and I bought 2 or 3 of each. And they saw wood. Do some serious cutting when you're fabricating your true sound hole area. Okay, let's see if I can show you a little bit here. The chisel blocks, I use these to make the ramp in the true sound hole. And so essentially you take something like this. There's a routed blank. Put the block on there. Now this is a buck chisel. They're not bad. They definitely need sharpening. Even the brand new ones out of a store, they're not bad. But by holding the block, you'll notice I have a straight edge glued to the back of this. Hold the block and then slide it down. Okay. I've got 30-degree blocks, 50-degree blocks, 45-degree blocks. You can experiment with different true sound hole ramps. However, there is nothing like a good Japanese chisel. These are a little pricey, but I guarantee you they are sharp. curiosity, I wonder. They are sharp. They'll cut cross grain. And again, sharpening is a whole nother thing. The advantage of biting a bullet and buying a Japanese chisel, they hold the edge a lot longer. There's like a mirror finish on there, but there's two bevels. I don't know if you can see it or not. Anyway, a good Japanese chisel. Now when I was making mine, I used clamps. I don't know how many of these things I've got. But I clamp the pieces together. I glue them, clamp the pieces together. They are indispensable. Scratch off, or sometimes for making impressions on where holes need to go. One thing I almost forgot, use pencils. Do not use pens, particularly gel pens. They soak into the wood. Okay, this is a little device I've used for holding a flute, because when you're using a plane and you're trying to finish this area off, or if you're trying to cut the length of it down, you know, round it out I should say, holding it can be a little tricky. So with this bar clamp, cheap one from Harbor Freight, put a 1/4 20 bolt here, and then I made this little wooden cone. Now you can clamp that in the bench vise, rotate it around, use sandpaper, use a plane, whatever, and it works pretty good. Alright, put that away, and tuning meters. These are the two tuning meters I utilize. The Intelli works well. It's simple to operate, easy to read, and it falls apart when you get up to making small 5th octave flutes, and so for that I'll use the Korg. Sometimes I'll use them both at the same time to make sure that the tuning is accurate. Alright. And for those who are using a lathe, I had a lot of difficulty keeping the inside bore concentric with the outside bore, and it was all due to the Lathe Centers. A friend of mine made this one for me, and it works fairly well. I put a little tape on it to make sure it fits snugly into the bore, but not great. Then Brad Young tipped me off to this, which is that made by Randy Stenzel, I believe, who's no longer with us. Anyway, this is a great great center. I use a router on my lathe. I slipped and ruined a 1-inch bore and had to find a replacement, and Brad tipped me off to these collets, which are made by Beal Tool, and they're great. All you have to do, take this is a 3/4 bore flute, poke it in there, and don't tighten this up too much because you'll split the flute, and then you've got a center that you can chuck into your lathe. Those work great. Come on. Well, once you get them in there, sometimes they're tricky to get out. Anyway, it cuts it. And I don't know, it's out of focus there. It makes a very concentric bore. I'm sure there's some hand tools I've forgotten. A palm sander. That's a power tool, I guess. But it's a significant investment if you're going to make volumes of flutes. And a volume to me would be a flute a week. Anyway, I hope it's been helpful, and have a good day.